Welcome to the Real News Network. My name is Gregory Wilpert, and I'm coming to you from Quito, Ecuador. The impeachment process against Brazil's President Dilma Rousseff is proceeding to the Senate this week. She is being accused of having committed a fiscal irregularity back in 2014 during an election year when her government deferred loan payments until after the election in order to make the government's financial position look better than it really was. In effect, she is being accused of an accounting irregularity. Last week, the lower house, the Chamber of Deputies, voted with more than two-thirds majority to impeach Rousseff, and now it's the Senate's turn to decide. If over 50% vote in favor in the coming days, and it looks like there are enough senators to vote for impeachment, Rousseff will be temporarily removed from office for the next 6 months while a trial is held and a final decision is made about whether to remove her from office permanently. Rousseff and many others are calling this a coup, a legislative coup, since she is not being accused of an impeachable offense. More than that, many of the legislators who are voting for her impeachment, including the leader of the Chamber of Deputies, Eduardo Cunha, are themselves accused of far more serious crimes of corruption than she is. We have seen this before, actually, in Paraguay when Fernando Lugo was removed in 2012, and in Honduras when Manuel Zelaya was removed from office in 2009. In Venezuela, the opposition majority in the National Assembly has also been trying to remove President Nicolas Maduro recently, but has been unable to do so far. So with us today to talk about Brazil and the broader context in which these things are happening is Boaventura de Sousa Santos. He is a professor of sociology at Coimbra University in Portugal and a distinguished legal scholar at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. His most recent book is If God Were a Human Rights Activist. He's joining us from Coimbra, Portugal. Thanks, Boaventura, for agreeing to be on the program again.
Nice having me.
So the political situation in Brazil seems to have become even more complicated since the last time we talked a couple of weeks ago. Let's first focus on the specifics of what happened and then take a broader look at Latin America in general. Mm-hmm. So in this impeachment process itself, would you say it is legal or not? Does it have a legal basis, or is it completely political and perhaps even sexist, as Dilma Rousseff recently suggested herself? And if it is not legal, that is, if it is completely political, is there any chance of it being challenged at any other level, such as the Supreme Court or somewhere else?
Well, it's definitely a political judgment. There is no legal basis for it because the president has not been accused for any crime that would justify impeachment. In fact, the irregularities that have been mentioned were irregularities that have been committed since Fernando Henrique Cardoso was president, and all the governors in all states do that. It's a kind of a budgetary type of manipulation that at the most would probably be a small fine, not an atomic bomb of an impeachment. So it does not justify that. So there is no legal basis for that. This is a political judgment by dominant classes and conservative forces that, in fact, did not accept that they lost the elections in 2014, and right after that started to manipulate the media, which is easier given the oligopolic media control they have in Brazil, to create the social and the political environment for an impeachment. But there is no legal basis for that, and that's why I think this case comprises a kind of a parliamentary coup, similar to some that we had in the past in Latin America. Besides the fact that, probably in this case, besides the fact that there is no crime at stake, and in fact, all the deliberations in the lower chamber in April 17 were about everything except the legal reasons for impeachment. The fact that probably this is a case in which probably the most honest politician in Latin America, at least in Brazil, is being ousted by the most corrupt politicians in Brazil. I mean, Eduardo Cunha, Renan Calheiros, I mean, the both presidents of the both houses, they have been accused in multiple instances of corruption, and therefore it is really apparent for the international public opinion, as well as for Brazilians, that this is a case of political assassination of Dilma and, of course, of Lula.
Okay, so what happens next? The vice president who wants to take over has committed the exact same offense as Dilma, apparently, Michel Temer, and so he could be impeached too. If so, then Eduardo Cunha, who definitely seems to be involved in some kind of criminal corrupt activity, would become president. So in the end, how can anyone, opposition or pro-government, justify such an outcome that somebody who's has been accused of far worse crimes becomes president? I mean, how would that? What does this mean for Brazilian politics?
Well, it means a lot. I mean, it means almost the collapse of democracy. I know I've been writing in my writings that we live in many of these societies in low-intensity democracies. That is to say, democracies that are societies that are politically democratic but socially fascistic. That is to say, in which there is lots of despotisms that are going underneath the political sphere. What happened on the 17th of April, we saw that this fascistic undercurrent of Brazilian society surfaced in the highest political space, which is the parliament, the Congress. And we saw all these deputies saying things, preposterous things, in favor of dictatorship, in favor of the family, in favor of God. I mean, everything that had nothing to do with impeachment. So this shows the style and stamina of the politicians that are at this point in power in Brazil, and where in fact do not represent, sociologically speaking, the Brazilian society. Because just to give you an example, 51% at least of 54% of the people in Brazil declare themselves as African, Negroes or African descent people, and only 4% of them are deputies in the parliament. 51% of the women of the population in Brazil are women, and only 10% are deputies. Well, it is interesting that up to 29 women that are deputies, 20 voted against impeachment. Of the black African deputies, 70% voted against impeachment, which shows that, in fact, if the parliament would reflect the sociological diversity and the sociological context of Brazilian society, we would have no impeachment. The problem is that we have a kind of distorted political system, which needs really a very profound reform. So in this case, I mean, once the commission of the Senate, which has already been formed and is going to decide and has already decided that it will be in favor of impeachment, the Senate will vote finally, and it's a simple majority, and therefore, most probably, the Senate will decide for impeachment. In that case, the Dilma Rousseff will be suspended for 6 months, and then she may file a complaint to the Supreme Court, the Federal Supreme Court, because of irregularities in here. And we don't know what the Supreme Court will decide. In general, the Supreme Court in this case have been acting rather procedurally. That is to say, does not want to tackle on the merit of the issues, but try to address all the procedural issues, even though individually many of the ministers have been saying lots of things in public, and many of them are inconvenient, given their status in, making political pronouncements about the situations. So we may find ourselves with a president, after a president that is an honest president, nobody has anything against her, that has been elected by 54 million people, the country is going to be governed by a person that is accused of many instances of corruption. And according to the polls, if he would be submitted to an election, you would get no more than 1% of the votes. So this is the tragic situation of the Brazilian democracy. So that's why I think that the social movements in Brazil claim that the best solution would be for no impeachment, and of course the continuation of Dilma, but of course a new government. They don't want this government. In fact, Dilma did lots of concessions to the conservative forces, and the conservative sources, in a sense, decharacterized our government, and in a sense, they are in part responsible for the situation now. And this, again, is not unprecedented if we look at other Latin American cases, and we can discuss later if you want.
Okay, unfortunately, this is all the time we have for part one of this interview. But join us for part two, which will follow right after. We're talking to Boaventura de Sousa Santos, who's in Coimbra, Portugal. And join us, as I said, for part two following right now.